What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dirt Road Therapy. This one is going to be all about the Spool Bus. This is my 2001 Jeep Cherokee. You've seen it on pretty much every episode I've ever made. And today we're gonna pop the hood, we're gonna look inside, I'm gonna tell you all about it. So you might be thinking, I saw this Jeep somewhere before and it wasn't on Dirt Road Therapy. And you'd be correct, that was on BleepinJeep. I built this Jeep on their channel. I put a TDI from a Volkswagen Jetta under the hood, made it to the Jeep transmission. I'm gonna tell you a lot more about that, and we're gonna get into some of that on my channel in the next couple months. I'm gonna be building a new engine for this. We're basically gonna be completely redoing this Jeep. It's gonna be version 2.0 of the Spool Bus. So make sure you stick around for that. But if you were wondering why those episodes on BleepinJeep stopped, where did John go, what happened to the Spool Bus, you found it. It's right here. And we go out on adventures in this thing all the time. Has about 60,000 miles on it since I did the swap 4 years ago. A couple quick facts about the Spool Bus before we get all into it. It's on 33-inch tires. I have 410 gears, factory axles, front and rear. They're not necessarily original to this Jeep because it's a high pinion 30, but Chrysler 8 1/4 in the rear, converted to disc brake. AX15 manual transmission, mated to a Dana 300, which is flipped and has a doubler. Both of those, the flip kit and the doubler, are from Behemoth drivetrain. I've got 4 inches of lift. We got Skyjacker springs in the front, Iron Rock 3-link, Iron Rock off-road springs in the rear, which I love. I got the question all the time when I was on BleepinJeep, what wheels are those? Because they weren't these wheels. I had a 10-hole steel wheel. It was a Dodge Charger or Chrysler 300 wheel. It's a 17-inch, 514.5 back spacing, big center bore hubcap wheel that those cars came with, you know, from whatever it was, 2007 or 8 to 2010 or 12. But that wheel bolts on perfectly and it worked really well for me. The reason that I chose that wheel when I did was because I had a free spin hub kit on this Dana 30. I had to use a wheel with a larger center bore to have those hubs work. So it really limited my choices when I wanted a 17-inch wheel with a large center bore. But they were a car wheel, and as such, they didn't hold up real great to low tire pressure, rock crawling, and off-roading. I've since switched to just a factory JK wheel with a wheel adapter. These are 5-on-5. And of course, not a great back spacing for these axles, but with the wheel adapter, they work. Running Patagonia Milestar MT. There's our 285 70 R17, which is a 33 11.5. So pretty cool tire. Been pretty happy with the Milestars, but these are just the MT01s, the original. I'd be interested to try the MT02s. A lot of people rag on these tires because they're inexpensive and don't have the greatest reputation of holding up sidewalls and things like that. I've cut the sidewalls up a little bit, but I've not blown a sidewall out yet. And been happy with Milestars, wouldn't hesitate to run them again. But the BFGs that I had before, really didn't have any issues with them, but they wore down pretty quickly to a point, and then they just kind of flatlined. Didn't seem to really want to wear down anymore. They got harder compound, and those nicked up and chipped up like crazy. Under the hood, we've got a Volkswagen TDI 1.9 liter turbo diesel from a 2001 Jetta. That's adapted to the AX15 using a TD conversions adapter. I'll leave a link to that in the description. If you guys are considering buying one of those, use my link. It helps out support the channel. A lot of people said when I started doing this swap, no way it's going to compete with a 4.0. The 4.0 is worlds better than a 1.9 liter. How can you go from 4 liters to 1.9 and expect it to be anything usable?
Absolutely, it's a turbo diesel. There's no replacement for displacement, as they say, unless you have a turbo.
It's more than usable. It buries 4.0s. It gets over 25 miles to the gallon consistently. So that should kind of cover the quick facts of the Spool Bus. Let's talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of what's in here. So here it is, the Volkswagen TDI. And the reason that I chose this engine, not only just because I had it, that was kind of an obvious reason to choose it, but there's a ton of aftermarket support for these engines. And while it's tiny, I mean, this is the timing cover of the engine, and this is the bell housing of the transmission. You know, we're like less than 2 feet long here. We've got all this extra room from where the 4.0 isn't, and the fan and all that stuff. There's no fan on the front of this. I am able to cool this efficiently with just the stock electric fan, but the aftermarket support for these engines is huge. I'll tell you more about what I have done to it. Stick around. This particular version of the engine, it's called the ALH. That's the engine code that Volkswagen gave it. That was available technically from 99.5 to 2003. If you're looking for one of these engines for yourself, do stay away from the 99s because they can be different as far as how the tuning for the computer goes and some of the wiring harness stuff, a little bit different on those. But it's a VE pump, so it's a mechanical injection. There's not like unit injectors, or it's not common rail. There's all individual injectors, injection pump, mechanically driven, electronically controlled. Now you can convert this engine to fully mechanical, and a lot of people do that, but that's not what I wanted to accomplish with this. I wanted it to be tunable. I want it to be, you know, OBD2 scannable and be very much a modern engine in this Jeep. It would be very easy to basically delete all the electronic stuff and change this pump out for one that works. And similar size pump, a Land Rover pump is a common one that people use. But it is, as far as I'm concerned, for what I know about tuning engines and working on engines, it's going to be a lot easier for me to make good power if it's able to be tuned by a computer. So that's why I chose that, and we'll talk a little bit more about everything that's going on under the hood here. But that's the Volkswagen power plant. There's a crank adapter on the back of the engine that allows me to mate it to a Jeep flywheel. I'm not running the factory original flywheel. I have a center force high inertia flywheel, just a heavier flywheel. I've got a turbo diesel conversions, which was bought by Northwest Fab since I did this initially, and they've made a lot of really nice improvements to the adapter. That's a aluminum adapter that mates to the Jeep AX15 transmission. So realistically, you could take this engine and do nothing to the engine other than, I would suggest minimum you do have the injectors, have new nozzles put on them and have them flow checked and dialed in with new nozzles, and get a tune. You're going to need an immobilizer delete at a minimum, which is just so that you don't have to use the Volkswagen key in the system. And to do that, you might as well get a tune. So you're looking at talking to a tuner to do that part of it anyway. So you can do factory flywheel, you can do the automatic as well. And then there's no other parts to buy other than the crank adapter and the bell housing adapter. So basically that kit comes with the crank adapter and the bell housing adapter. It is compatible with the AX15 or the AW4 transmission. And I'm not going to get into everything that's involved in swapping an AW4. You can look into that. It's not complicated, but it is a little bit more involved than doing the manual. I chose to move my engine forward, which kind of puts the engine mounts in a better spot, gives you plenty of clearance to the firewall, and but it does make it that you've got to modify the shifter for the stick shift. I might, when I rebuild this engine and put a new power plant in here, shift it back. We'll see. I've got a big old air cleaner here, and this is like a canister style, uses a Donaldson filter, and I have this drawing cool air from the cowl. So I know if this is, you know, kind of tucked in here right, if my water started to come up over the hood, which I've not had it that deep, I know that I need to stop, shut down the engine, back out of the water, whatever. I'm running a Air Dog lift pump. So this has a water separator and a filter, huge water separator, huge filter. I've been really happy with that. It's way higher flow than this engine would ever need, but when I have bigger injectors, bigger turbo, all that stuff, I know this will keep up. This is where I have the Volkswagen computer. I've also got it piggybacked on the Jeep computer. The Volkswagen computer obviously is used for all the engine management, and there's no crossover into the Jeep computer. This does not, the engine doesn't care if this is here. The Jeep computer exists just because all of the gauges in the 01 are CAN bus, and this is required to drive those gauges. Now, of course, if we were to plug OBD2 into this thing, it's crying about all of the things that are missing, you know, the intake air temperature and the fuel injectors and, you know, I don't even know, all the things that aren't connected. I've stripped this harness down to just what I need, which is basically the coolant temperature sensor, which I just had a bung put in for that, the oil pressure sensor. The Volkswagen actually doesn't care about oil pressure for some reason, but oil pressure, coolant, it gets its battery voltage signal just off the system, so that's all good to go. Fuel gauge is untouched, speedometer is untouched, so tachometer is the only other thing, and I have a YouTube short explaining that, which you should check out. I won't get into that here, but basically a lot of the gauges are just left alone, and the Jeep computer is just along for the ride to make sure that those are powered. Talking about some things up front here. Winch bumper that I built myself. I got some inspiration from Bad Dad Fab winches. Winch mounts, Bad Dad Fab bumpers. I'm not exactly sure what his business name is, but they built a very similar winch tray. Some of theirs, they even cut out the cross member that's back there and tuck them in even further. My intercooler pipes route down through there, so I couldn't cut that cross member out completely. It didn't gain me anything to do that. I built or added a custom stiffener to that, customized stiffener, I should say. And the radiator is pushed back about probably 1.5 inches at this point. I did move it back a little bit further when I did that cross member stiffener. I am able to fit a air conditioning condenser between the large front mount intercooler and the radiator. So currently I have a CSF two row, brass and copper radiator in here, and this is kind of the go-to intercooler that I found for the XJ. Everybody's been using that one on XJs and MJs, and it's just the same side. The upper outlet is angled at a 45, and that works really, really well in the front of these. I do plan on running air conditioning. However, I'm going to need a different turbo to do that. I'm running not the factory turbo currently. It's a custom setup from X-Man Turbos, and it's not the one that I would suggest today that somebody run out and buy for this Jeep. So we're not going to talk too heavily about that, other than the fact that I have pushed 27 PSI with that turbo, which with the fueling to match that should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 to 170 horsepower. and about 300 foot-pounds of torque. So if you know your 4.0 stuff, you know that's less horsepower, but significantly more torque than the 4.0 puts out. And that's as soon as it hits boost. So we're talking less than 2,000 RPM. I am running an anti-rock sway bar in the front. It's all converted to WJ steering and brakes here. Stinky Fab is who makes the tie rod that I'm running, as well as the track bar brackets, though I had to custom make a track bar to clear my oil pan. Not sure if you can exactly see that, but it had to be bent custom to clear the oil pan with the engine being moved forward. I've got a Ironman steering box brace, sector shaft brace that I really love. That saved my steering box, guaranteed. Steering box was getting kind of sloppy and tired. I put this thing on there and it shored it right up and does an awesome job. I can't take full credit for the bumper build. I built the swing out. I've modified this bumper heavily. It was built for the earlier model XJs. It didn't have any tail light return here. It didn't tie into the armor, of course. It had no lights, but it did have this cool storage bin in it. People ask about this all the time, and I will explain more about that in a second. But I had to cut and widen this bumper by about 4 inches total. Make it tie in with this armor nicely and fit the Jeep perfectly. I don't have a whole lot of history on this bumper other than that I live in Pennsylvania. There was a guy, semi-local, that had built a bunch of these bumpers, and I guess he made some prototypes. Maybe he had some fab shops working with him to make them, but he basically couldn't get production of them to where he wanted it as far as a level of output. So he folded. Never really had a name that I know of for making this. If you know, leave it in the comments, but I've never heard of a name associated with the guy or his company name that made these. But I've also made some other modifications too, and I'll show you here. Got a Rotopax built in on the swing out here that I like. The tire carrier works well. Overall, the whole thing just wasn't really designed for all that added leverage and weight. So the way that it's mounted needs to be changed. It's just gotten looser and looser over time. This was supposed to be a temporary closure there, but of course, we know how that stuff goes. But basically the whole swing out aspect of this is gonna get nuked, mainly because I wanna be able to access this storage compartment without having to swing open the tire. But I also Mazda lined the armor and the bumpers, and I am gonna be stripping all of that off. That's all I'll say about that. Partially, some of it was my prep, but it hasn't held up great. Anyway, that's why I did that before doing anything crazy, like the whole body. The way that this was built initially too, the top of this bumper had all these screws in it. So I welded the hinge to the bumper, and then it has these screws here so you can still take the lid off. And those used to hit the tailgate. Now they don't. So you can open this up all the way with the tailgate closed. And this has a good amount of storage in it. I usually have my tow straps in here, some of my recovery gear, but I had that out for another project, and so it's not in here at the moment. But real nice little storage compartment built into the bumper there. It's got tow points, which I have used. And yeah, it's a good design. I really like the look of the bumper. I need to kind of get the next evolution of this bumper going. As for interior mods worth noting, these door pockets are a total game changer. You can find these on eBay. I'll leave a link in the description. I make no commission off of selling these, but I want every XJ owner to have those because they're awesome. I can fit a map folio in there with a bunch of off-road maps that I love. Can also fit a 16.5 ounce water bottle in there nicely, and it keeps it cooler than if it was boiling in your center console. Speaking of center console, I had a friend help me make some of these. This is 3D printed, and I believe he said it's 80% infill, so this thing's pretty solid. and I just have it Velcroed in here. So this makes your back cup holder useful. And if there's a link to this, I'll leave it in the description. I believe he put this up on Shapeways or something where you guys can make yourselves some of these if you'd like. But another game changer for your XJ interior right there. K Suspension makes these. There's also like Trail & Co, JCR, a couple other companies that make Molly panels for the center console. That really helps. I mean, really, you guys know XJs are so limited on interior space. This kind of stuff helps. Probably temporary, but I have my Midland mounted there. Definitely not temporary. I love having it on a steely magnet. And, you know, these are just some Army surplus store bags that I have hanging there. Let's talk about those 3 sticks real quick. I have an episode dedicated to what these levers do and the transfer case that they're connected to. So I will leave that explanation to that video. But really, we've got transfer case, front and rear, and the doubler in there. And of course it's a 5-speed, so we've got the stick shift for that. Well guys, hopefully that's all you want to know about the Spool Bus. If there's other things that you still have questions about, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll either answer your comment or we can make a whole video about your questions if there's sufficient content there. But yeah, getting ready to make some changes, so make sure you stay tuned for that. We're going to be doing more TDI related content on the channel and still getting out and adventuring whenever possible. So thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe and all that fancy stuff. See you guys on the next one.